The gavel struck like thunder in the silent courtroom. Danny Roberts stood frozen, watching his son's hands disappear behind cold steel handcuffs. Kyle wouldn't meet his eyes. The same hands that had cradled puppies 3 weeks ago now bore the weight of chains. The same boy who'd whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad," through tears, was now inmate number pending. "Mr. Roberts," the judge's voice cut through the suffocating air, "your son has pleaded guilty to animal cruelty. Do you have anything to say?" Danny's throat closed. Images flashed, a German shepherd tied to a tree, starving. 3 puppies shivering in winter cold. His son, his only son, had done that. "I raised you better than this," Danny whispered, the words barely escaping. But to understand how a father's love could survive his son's betrayal, how a dying dog could save them all, you must go back 30 days, back to the mountain road, back to the moment everything changed. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 30 days earlier, 4 Harley-Davidson motorcycles carved through the winter fog of Blue Ridge Parkway, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and the January sun was already bleeding into the mountains. Jack Morrison led the pack, his weathered hands steady on the handlebars of his Road King. At 55, the former Gulf War veteran carried the kind of silence that came from burying too many people he loved. 10 years ago, his wife. 3 years ago, his adopted son. The photo in his worn leather wallet showed a young police officer with kind eyes, Officer David Hayes, the boy Jack had raised from age 7. Behind him rode Tom Bradley, a 48-year-old mechanic whose laughter couldn't quite hide the bitterness of 5 years stolen by wrongful imprisonment. He'd been released in 21 exonerated, but the system never apologized. The scars on his knuckles told stories of prison fights, and his hands still shook when police cars passed. Sarah Mitchell followed on her white street glide, the color chosen by the daughter she'd never see grow up. At 42, she'd spent a decade running from the memory of 8-year-old Emily, left dying on a roadside while cars passed by. Sarah had become a trauma nurse, then a biker, always searching for the thing that would make the pain stop. Danny Roberts brought up the rear on his aging fat boy, worrying about everything he couldn't control. His farm was drowning in $45,000 of debt. His wife had filed for divorce, and his 22-year-old son, Kyle, hadn't answered his calls in 5 days. The $1,200 in his bank account felt like a countdown to losing everything. They stopped at mile marker 34, a pullover overlooking the vast Carolina wilderness. This spot, this exact stretch of asphalt, was where David Hayes had proposed to Ellen, where he'd told Jack he was joining the police force, where, 3 years ago, they'd scattered his ashes. Jack killed his engine. The others followed suit. In the sudden silence, the wind carried the scent of pine and coming snow. He pulled out a flask of whiskey and 5 small cups, one for each rider and one for the dead. They stood in a semicircle, breath misting in the cold air. "To the ones we lost," Jack's gravelly voice broke the stillness. "To the roads we ride, to the brothers we keep." They drank in silence. Tom lit a cigarette. Sarah wiped her eyes. Danny checked his phone again, still nothing from Kyle. Jack was screwing the cap back on the flask when Sarah's head snapped up. "Wait!" she whispered. "Did you hear that?" They froze. The wind died, and through the silence came a sound that didn't belong. Weak, desperate, barely there. A dog's cry, somewhere in the darkness of the forest. The sound came again, a thin, rasping bark that seemed to scrape the bottom of desperation. Sarah was already moving toward the tree line, pulling a flashlight from her jacket. "Sarah, wait!" Danny started. "Someone's hurt," she said flatly. The nurse, in her overriding everything else. Jack caught up to her in 3 strides. "Tom, you're with us. Danny, stay with the bikes." When Danny opened his mouth to protest, Jack's expression hardened. "Someone needs to watch our backs. Cell service is garbage out here." They pushed into the forest. Boots crunching over frozen pine needles, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees under the canopy. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the thickening dusk, catching fragments of bark, dead leaves, the white mist of their breathing. 200 feet in, they found her. The German shepherd was tied to a pine tree with a length of black rope, the kind with a slip knot that tightened with struggle. She'd stopped struggling. Her rib cage showed through matted fur, her legs trembled with the effort of standing, and her eyes, amber and dimming, tracked their approach with neither hope nor fear, just exhaustion. Around her front paws, pressed against her belly for warmth, 3 puppies whimpered. They couldn't have been more than 2 months old. One was nearly still, its breathing shallow and wet. "Jesus Christ," Tom breathed. Sarah was already on her knees, fingers finding the dog's neck pulse. "Weak. She's hypothermic and severely dehydrated. She won't last the night." She moved to the smallest puppy, the gray one that wasn't moving much. "This one's barely breathing." The scene told its story in details that made Jack's jaw clench. An overturned plastic bowl that had once held food, dog feces, at least 4 days old, tire tracks in the mud, recent but not fresh, 2 empty Budweiser bottles, and boot prints size 10, leading back toward the access road. "Whoever did this wanted her to die slow," Jack said quietly. The old military training kicking in, he was reading the scene like a battlefield. They came prepared, tied her where no one would hear, left just enough to make it look like an accident if she was found. Tom had his Leatherman knife out, hands shaking not from cold. "Son of a bitch!" he muttered, kneeling to cut the rope, when his fingers touched the raw skin beneath, where the dog had fought the noose. Something broke in his expression. "I know how it feels, girl," he whispered. "I know exactly how it feels." The dog flinched when the rope came free, but she didn't run. She couldn't. Instead, she immediately turned to the puppies, licking frantically at the gray one's face. Jack was already shrugging out of his leather jacket. "Tom, give me your hoodie. Sarah, you got water?" They worked with the efficiency of people who'd seen too much death to waste time on shock. Sarah wrapped the 3 puppies in Jack's jacket, holding them against her chest. Tom draped his hoodie over the mother dog's back. Jack unscrewed his thermos. The coffee inside was still warm, and carefully poured a few drops into the dog's mouth. "Easy, girl, easy now." The dog's tongue moved weakly. She tried to lift her head toward the puppies. "They're safe," Jack told her, his voice dropping into something gentle, something he hadn't used since David died. "We've got them. You can rest." Tom slid his arms under the dog's 60 pounds of dead weight and trembling muscle. She was too weak to protest. "I got her. Let's move." The walk back was 200 feet that felt like 2 miles. Tom's arms burned. Sarah whispered to the puppies, feeling the smallest one's heartbeat flutter like a dying bird. Jack led the way, checking every shadow with the paranoia of someone who'd learned that evil often doubled back. Danny saw them emerge from the woods and dropped his cigarette. "What in the—" "Start your bike," Jack snapped. "We need a vet, now." Danny's fingers fumbled with his phone. "Mountain View Animal Rescue, 43 miles? Closes at 9? Sarah checked her watch. "It's 6. 3 hours. Then we ride fast." Jack was already calculating. "Tom, the dog rides with me. Sarah, you take the puppies. Danny, Tom, you two lead." They secured the mother dog in Jack's saddlebag, cushioned with every spare piece of clothing they had. Sarah tucked the puppies into her backpack, then wore it backwards against her chest. She could feel their tiny hearts beating against hers. The Harleys roared to life. 4 headlights pierced the gathering dark. They pulled onto the parkway doing 60, then 70. The posted limit was 45. But Jack didn't care. The temperature had dropped to -1. Snow was starting to fall. 15 miles in. They stopped at a gas station. Sarah checked pulses. The gray puppy, she found herself thinking of it as Hope, stopped breathing for 10 seconds. Sarah performed Deer with 2 fingers, counting compressions, willing the tiny chest to rise. It did, barely. Danny bought bottles of warm water and paper towels. Jack refueled in 90 seconds flat. Tom calculated 40 minutes if nothing goes wrong. At 19:15, something went wrong. Jack's engine light flickered on. They pulled over on a shoulder barely wide enough for 4 bikes. Tom diagnosed it in 2 minutes, loose drive belt, fixable, and had them moving again in 10. But now it was 19:25, and they had 35 minutes until the rescue closed. The final 15 minutes were the longest of their lives. Jack pushed his bike to 75 on mountain curves that demanded 50 behind him. Sarah felt Hope go limp. She couldn't stop, couldn't pull over. She did CPR one-handed while the bike screamed beneath her, counting compressions in time with the white lines flashing past. Danny found himself praying for the first time in 20 years. "Please, God, please." At 8 o'clock exactly, 4 Harleys skidded into the gravel parking lot of Mountain View Animal Rescue. The lights were still on. Jack was off his bike before it stopped moving, leaning on the horn, 3 sharp blasts. The door flew open. A woman in scrubs, 45, auburn hair pulled back, ran out. "What's the emergency?" "Hypothermia, dehydration, starvation," Sarah gasped, pulling the puppies from her chest. "Critical." The woman's eyes went to the mother dog in Jack's arms. Her face went white. Her hands flew to her mouth. And when she spoke, her voice cracked with something that sounded like recognition, like grief, like impossible hope. "Liberty?" Dr. Ellen Crawford stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the dying dog in Jack Morrison's arms like she was seeing a ghost. Her hands trembled as she reached out, then pulled back, afraid to touch something that couldn't possibly be real. "You know this dog?" Jack's voice was sharp with urgency. Ellen shook herself, snapping back into veterinarian mode. "Inside. Now, exam room 2. But her eyes never left the German shepherd's face as they rushed through the doors. The next 30 minutes were a blur of desperate efficiency. Ellen worked with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years saving animals. But her hands shook in ways they never had before. She called out vitals like artillery coordinates. "Core temperature 94 degrees. Normal is 101 to 102. She's shutting down." The thermometer clattered against the metal table. "Pulse 40 beats per minute. Should be 60 to 140, cardiac failure imminent. Weight 58 pounds. Ellen's voice cracked. She should be 75. She's lost nearly a quarter of her body mass. Blood sugar came back at 45 milligrams per deciliter. Severe hypoglycemia. Ellen started an intravenous line pumping warm fluids and glucose directly into the dog's bloodstream. Heating blankets went under and over the shivering body, oxygen mask over the muzzle. The 3 puppies received similar treatment, though their prognosis was better. The 2 larger ones, Sarah found herself naming them Faith and Grace in her head, responded quickly to formula and warmth. But the smallest, the gray one, the one Sarah thought of as Hope, was another story entirely. Ellen listened to Hope's lungs, and her expression darkened. Pneumonia advanced, and she took the puppy to the X-ray machine. When the images came up on the screen, Sarah, who'd seen enough chest X-rays in her nursing career, understood immediately. 60% of both lungs were clouded with infection. She needs surgery, Ellen said quietly. Drainage, direct antibiotic injection, she can support without it. She didn't finish the sentence. How much? Jack asked. Ellen met his eyes. $8,000. The number landed like a physical blow. Danny checked his phone banking app with shaking fingers. 1,247? Tom pulled out his wallet, counted bills. 2,300. It's everything I have. Sarah's voice was small. 800. They all looked at Jack. He stared at the dying puppy for a long moment, then reached for his wallet. Inside was the photo of David Hayes in his police uniform. Smiling, young, alive. Behind it, a cashier's check, $5,000. Down payment on the house David had picked out before he died. The house Jack had been planning to buy, to keep, to preserve as a shrine to his son. 5,000. Jack said, That's 9,347 total. Jack, that's your... Tom started. David would have wanted this. Jack's voice was iron. I know, my boy. Do it. Save them all. Ellen nodded once, then turned away. But not before they saw her wipe her eyes. While Ellen and her assistant prepped Hope for emergency surgery, she stabilized the mother dog Liberty. She kept calling her Liberty with continued IV fluids and slow rewarming. Once the German Shepherd was stable enough to leave for a few minutes, Ellen stepped into her office. Through the window, Sarah saw her collapse into her chair, face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Sarah knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission. Doctor, what's going on? How do you know this dog? Ellen looked up, mascara running, and the story came pouring out like a confession she'd been holding for 3 years. Her name is Liberty. She was a K-9 with Boston Police Department, explosive detection, one of the best who ever served. Ellen's hands twisted together. She was my husband's partner. The words hung in the air. Jack, who'd followed Sarah in, went very still. Your husband, Jack repeated slowly. What was his name? Officer David Hayes. Ellen's voice broke on the name. He died 3 years ago, January 17th, 2022. Jack sat down heavily, the color draining from his face. Ellen Crawford, David's Ellen. She looked at him properly for the first time, really looked, and recognition dawned. Jack Morrison. A sob escaped her. Oh, my God, I didn't recognize you. The beard, when did you... After the funeral. Jack's voice was hollow. I couldn't stay in Boston. moved to Asheville, changed my number. I couldn't. His hands were shaking now. Ellen, that's David's Liberty out there. I thought she was dead. Ellen whispered, I thought I'd lost her too. The story came out in fragments, punctuated by tears they'd both been holding back for years. Liberty had been David's K-9 partner for 6 years. She'd been there for his greatest triumph, finding 7 kilograms of unexploded sea after the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, saving countless lives. She'd served in 156 operations without a single failure. In 2019, she'd received the Medal of Valor when David was shot during a drug bust in 2022. Liberty had been home. They brought her to the hospital. She'd laid beside his bed for 72 hours, not eating, not drinking, just waiting. When David died at 3:47 in the morning, Liberty had howled a sound Ellen said she'd never forget, a sound that made the entire ICU go silent. At David's funeral, Liberty had laid beside the casket and cried, not barked, cried. The sound had broken everyone there. Afterward, Ellen couldn't keep her. She worked 70 hours a week at the clinic. David's son, Marcus, 17 at the time, had tried to care for Liberty, but the dog was a constant reminder of everything he'd lost. In June 2022, Marcus begged Ellen to rehome Liberty. I can't look at her without seeing Dad, he'd said. Ellen had found what she thought was a perfect family in Vermont. The Thorntons. Good people, big yard, 2 kids who loved dogs. In July 2022, Liberty went to live with them. In August, the Thorntons called. Liberty had escaped. They'd searched everywhere. Police, shelters, social media campaigns, nothing. Ellen had driven to Vermont herself, walked the woods for days. Liberty had vanished. That was 2.5 years ago, Ellen said. Vermont to North Carolina is 600 miles. How did she couldn't finish. Jack's voice was barely a whisper. David made me promise, his last text message, the night before he died. He said, Dad, if anything happens to me, take care of Liberty. She's family. I promised him. And then his voice broke. I lost her too. They sat in silence, 2 people drowning in the same grief, until Ellen's assistant knocked on the door. Doctor, we're ready for surgery. The operation took 4 hours. Sarah, despite having no veterinary training, suited up and assisted. Her nursing skills translated enough to be useful passing instruments, monitoring vitals, holding tiny puppy ribs open while Ellen worked. But more than that, Sarah needed to do something, needed to save something, needed to not be the person who'd arrived too late to save Emily. Twice. Hope's heart stopped. Push. Sarah performed CPR with 2 fingers while Ellen prepped the defibrillator paddles. The second time, they shocked the tiny heart 3 times before it restarted. In the waiting room, Jack, Tump, and Danny sat in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, drinking burnt coffee from a machine that should have been retired in 1995. They didn't talk much. Gant scrolled through his phone, looking at news articles about Raymond Burke, the police chief who'd arrested him 10 years ago. His finger hovered over the contact for his lawyer, then moved away. Some battles weren't worth refighting. Danny called Kyle's phone for the 15th time. Voicemail again. He left another message. Son, where are you? Call me back. Please. He checked Kyle's Facebook. The last post was 6 days old, a cryptic, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, with no photo, no explanation. 12 people had commented asking if he was okay. Kyle hadn't responded to any of them. Jack held the photo of David and Liberty from 2018. They were at a park. David in uniform. Liberty sitting at attention beside him, both looking at the camera. Partners, family. Jack read David's final text message for the 1,000th time. Dad, if anything happens to me, take care of Liberty. She's family. I'm sorry, son. Jack whispered to the photo, I'm so sorry. At 2 in the morning, Ellen emerged from surgery. Her scrubs were soaked with sweat and flecked with blood. Her eyes were exhausted, but her smile was real. Liberty's stable. The fluids are working. Her temperature's up to 98 degrees. She'll make it. The relief in the room was palpable, but Ellen's smile faded slightly. Hope survived the surgery. I removed the fluid, treated the infection directly, but the next 48 hours will tell. She's critical. If her body doesn't respond to the antibiotics, she didn't finish. Danny's voice was rough. But she has a chance. She has a chance, Ellen confirmed. They stood together in the fluorescent hallway. 4 bikers and a veterinarian, all of them running on fumes and hope. You saved her life tonight, Ellen said quietly. Liberty's been trying to survive for months, alone, starving. But you found her. You brought her back. Jack's jaw was tight. Someone did this to her. Ellen, someone tied her to that tree and left her to die. I need to know who. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Jack and Tom returned to mile marker 364 at first light, armed with plastic bags and Jack's old military discipline. The crime scene, because that's what Jack insisted on calling it, was exactly as they'd left it. Jack worked methodically, photographing everything with his phone before touching anything. The 2 Budweiser bottles went into separate bags. The rope, that damned black rope with its cruel slip knot, went into another. Tom measured and photographed the tire tracks, Goodyear Wrangler 270, the kind of all-terrain tire you'd find on half the pickup trucks in North Carolina. But it was Tom who found the most damning piece of evidence, a scrap of fabric caught on a low branch, torn from something larger, navy blue, heavy cotton, a hoodie, by the look of it, and in faded white letters, barely visible, NC State University. Whoever did this, Tom said, turning the fabric over in his gloved hands. They're local. They know this spot. It's too remote to stumble on by accident. Jack knelt by the tire tracks, his jaw working. Question is, do we call the police? Tom's laugh was bitter. And tell them what? We found a dog, Jack. Animal cruelty is technically a felony. But you and I both know how this plays out. They file a report. It sits on someone's desk. Maybe they call us in 6 months to tell us the case went cold. He stood, brushing dirt from his knees. I spent 5 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I know exactly how much the system cares about justice. Jack wanted to argue, wanted to believe in the process. But Tom was right, and they both knew it. Then we find them ourselves, Jack said quietly. They brought the evidence back to Mountain View Animal Rescue, where Ellen was running morning checks on Liberty and the puppies. The mother dog was awake now, able to stand. Though her legs still trembled, she'd eaten half a bowl of boiled chicken and rice. Small victories. Ellen had a microchip scanner ready. K-9s were always chipped protocol, insurance, identification. She ran the scanner over Liberty's shoulders, down her spine, checking all the standard implant sites. Nothing. That's impossible, Ellen muttered. running the scanner again. Boston PD chips, all their KTs. I saw Liberty's chip registration myself. It was... She stopped, her fingers finding a small raised scar behind Liberty's right ear, a surgical scar, recent, maybe 6 months old. Oh, God, someone cut it out! The implication settled over them like frost. Someone had deliberately removed Liberty's identification. Someone who didn't want her traced back to Boston, to David Hayes, to whatever chain of custody had brought her from a loving home in Vermont to a tree in the North Carolina wilderness. This wasn't random, Jack said. This was planned. That afternoon, Tom was reviewing footage from his helmet-mounted GoPro. He'd been recording the ride for a video blog he barely maintained when he realized what he had: the entire rescue. From the moment they'd entered the woods to Sarah performing CPR on Hope during the ride. 6 minutes of raw, unedited proof of human cruelty and human kindness existing in the same frame. He posted it to Facebook with shaking hands. The caption was simple: "Found this mama dog tied to a tree and left to die with her pups. Some people don't deserve to breathe. We got her to safety. Please share to find who did this." The video had 10,000 views in 6 hours, 100,000 by midnight. By the morning of day 3, it had hit 2.5 million. At 48 hours, it was trending nationally with 50 million views. The comment section exploded, thousands of people sharing, crying, and raging at the cruelty. But buried in the outrage were comments that made Ellen's phone ring off the hook. "That looks like Liberty, the Boston K9. OMG, that's the hero dog from the marathon bombing. Is that Officer Hayes' dog? Someone tag Ellen Crawford." Ellen confirmed it in a comment that went viral itself. "Yes, this is Liberty, my late husband's KM partner. She's been missing since 22. Thank you to these heroes for saving her." Within hours, CNN, NBC, and Fox News were calling. Jack refused every interview. "This isn't about us," he told the reporters. "Find who did this. That's the story." Sarah, ever practical, set up a GoFundMe page, Save Hope the Puppy and Mountain View Rescue. The goal was $10,000 to cover Hope's surgery and help the clinic, which Ellen had quietly admitted was struggling financially. The donations poured in. Within 3 days, the campaign had raised $127,000. It was a miracle. It was hope made manifest. And then 50% of it vanished into a fake GoFundMe account that had mimicked their page, stolen their photos, and redirected donations to an overseas account. By the time Sarah caught it and reported it to the police, $63,500 were gone. They were left with the same amount, which was still more than they'd dreamed of. But the theft felt like a violation on top of violation. Day 7 brought Hope's surgery. The puppy had deteriorated overnight, her breathing labored, her tiny body burning with fever. Ellen had exhausted all conservative treatments. It was surgery or euthanasia, and after everything they'd been through, no one could stomach the latter. Sarah scrubbed in without being asked. Ellen didn't have the energy to refuse, and truthfully, she needed the help. They operated on a stainless steel table designed for animals 10 times Hope's size. The puppy weighed 3.2 pounds. Ellen's hands looked enormous as she worked. The surgery was 3 hours of meticulous, terrifying precision, opening the chest cavity of something so small felt like defusing a bomb. One wrong move, one slip of the scalpel, and it would be over. Hope's heart stopped at the 90-minute mark. The monitor's alarm shrieked. Ellen grabbed the pediatric defibrillator paddles while Sarah started chest compressions, 2 fingers pumping against a rib cage the size of her palm. Clear. The shock. A pause that lasted a lifetime. Then the monitor beeped. Once, twice. Regular rhythm. They'd gotten her back. The second time was worse. 2 hours in. Hope's blood pressure plummeted. The monitor flatlined with a sound that Sarah would hear in her nightmares. She compressed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ellen shocked. Nothing. Compressed again. 6, 7, 8. Come on, baby. Fight. Shocked again. Flatlined for 30 seconds. Sarah felt tears running behind her surgical mask. She thought of Emily, cold on a roadside, no one stopping. She thought of every patient she'd lost in 15 years of emergency nursing. "Don't you dare give up," she whispered. The monitor beeped. By the time Ellen stitched the last suture, both women were shaking with exhaustion. But Hope was breathing. Her lungs were clear. Her heart was strong. She'd made it. In recovery, Liberty was brought to see her puppies for the first time since the rescue. She sniffed each one carefully, lingering longest on Hope, licking the surgical site with desperate gentleness. Faith and Grace, the larger puppies, nursed eagerly, but there was no milk. Liberty's body was too depleted to produce any. Ellen noticed something else, too, something that didn't make sense. She ran her fingers over Liberty's abdomen, checking the mammary glands. They were small, underdeveloped, not the glands of a mother who'd recently given birth. She tried to dismiss it, but the thought wouldn't leave. That night, after everyone had gone home except Sarah, who'd volunteered to take the night shift, Ellen pulled blood samples from Liberty and all 3 puppies. She sent them to a lab with a note, "Rush DNA analysis, maternity toast, results ASAP." The answer came back 2 days later. Ellen read the email 3 times before she believed it. Then she called Jack. "We need to talk," she said, "about Liberty, about those puppies." "What's wrong?" Jack's voice was instantly alert. "Nothing's wrong. They're all healthy, but Jack—" Ellen's voice trembled. "Liberty isn't their mother, not biologically. Those puppies aren't hers." The message came through Facebook on day 8, from an account with no profile picture and a name that was obviously fake. "I know where that dog came from. Black Creek Fights. They operate every Saturday night. Abandoned warehouse. Route 74 mile marker 12. Careful." Jack showed it to Tom over coffee at a diner in Asheville. Tom's face went pale, then hard. "Black Creek Fights. I've heard of them. Underground dog-fighting ring. They've been operating for years. Police never seem to catch them." "We're going," Jack said. "Jack, these people are dangerous. They're criminals, armed criminals. Then we'll be careful." Jack's voice had that quality it got sometimes, the one that reminded Tom this man had served in combat. "David spent his life fighting scum like this. I'm not sitting this out." Danny insisted on coming. So did Sarah. By Saturday night at 11, all 4 of them were crouched in the woods, 200 yards from an abandoned warehouse on Route 74, watching through binoculars as trucks and cars pulled into the gravel lot. The building had been a textile mill once, back when North Carolina still had manufacturing. Now its windows were broken. its walls tagged with graffiti, and its interior lit by strings of work lights that cast harsh shadows. The sounds that came from inside made Sarah's skin crawl, barking, snarling, the roar of a crowd, and occasionally a yelp that was cut short. Through the cracked loading bay door, they could see the fighting pit, a circle of chain-link fence, maybe 15 feet in diameter, with blood-stained concrete at its center. Around it, men and a few women shouted and waved fistfuls of cash. The betting was fast and vicious. 500, 1,000, 5,000 a fight. In cages along the wall, dogs waited their turn. Jack counted 15. Pit bulls mostly, but also German shepherds, Rottweilers, even what looked like a Doberman mix. Some paced frantically. Others just lay there, eyes dead, already defeated. God, Sarah whispered, this is hell. Tom had his phone out, recording video. We need evidence, real evidence, not just our word. The man running the operation was immediately obvious. Mid-50s, thick build, leathered jacket, despite the indoor heat. He stood at the edge of the pit like a ringmaster, collecting money, signaling when fights started and stopped. When he turned toward the light, Tom's hand tightened on his phone so hard the case cracked. I know that guy, Tom breathed. Who is he? Jack asked. Police Chief Raymond Burke. Tom's voice was hollow. He's the one who arrested me 10 years ago. He was a sergeant then, testified at my trial. His K-9 unit found the evidence in my garage. Tom's laugh was bitter and broken. The evidence that sent me to prison for 5 years for a crime I didn't commit. Jack took the binoculars, focused on Burke's face, memorizing it. We need more than video. We need him on tape admitting to this. We need... He stopped. Danny had gone rigid beside him, his face the color of old paper. That's Kyle's truck, Danny whispered. A gray Chevy Silverado was pulling into the lot, distinctive because of the dent in the rear quarter panel where Kyle had backed into a fence post last summer. It parked near the entrance. The driver's door opened. Cale Roberts, 22 years old, wearing the NC State hoodie his parents had bought him when he'd enrolled 3 years ago, stepped out. He looked thin, nervous. He glanced around like a man expecting trouble, then walked to where Burke stood. Burke handed him an envelope. Kyle took it without counting the contents, nodded once, and headed back to his truck. Through Jack's binoculars, in the spill of light from the warehouse, the tires were clearly visible. Goodyear Wrangler 270R, the exact match for the tracks they'd found at Liberty's dumping site. Danny made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. He tried to stand. Jack pulled him back down. Not here, not now. That's my son, Danny gasped. That's my... I know, Jack said grimly. We follow him. We confront him somewhere safe, not here where Burke's people can make us all disappear. They waited until Kyle's truck pulled out, then ran back to their bikes. Oh, boy! They followed him at a distance, lights off when they could risk it, keeping far enough back that Kyle wouldn't notice, but close enough not to lose him in the rural darkness. Kyle drove straight to Danny's farm. He parked in the gravel drive, went inside through the kitchen door, and upstairs to his bedroom. The lights went on. 30 seconds later, they went off. Danny, Jack, Tom, and Sarah waited in the kitchen. They didn't turn on the lights. They just sat in the dark, listening to the old house settle, until Jack checked his watch and nodded. 2 a.m, time for truth. They went upstairs. Danny opened Kyle's bedroom door. Jack hit the light switch. Kyle sat up in the bed with a gasp. His eyes are wide and disoriented. "Dad, what the... where were you tonight?" Danny's voice shook. Kyle's eyes went to Jack, Tom, Sarah, all standing in his doorway like a jury out. With friends, Tom stepped forward and tossed his phone onto Kyle's bed. Video already playing. "Watch!" Kyle's face went from confusion to recognition to horror in the span of 15 seconds. The video showed him clearly taking the envelope from Burke. The warehouse behind him, the caged dogs visible through the open door. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain what?" Danny's voice broke. "You're involved with dogfighting. It's not what it looks like." Jack moved into the room, and something about his posture, combat-ready, dangerous, made Kyle press back against the headboard. "Then tell us what it is. Now." The confession came in pieces, each one more damning than the last. Kyle had gotten into gambling, online poker first, then sports betting, then private games in the back rooms of bars. He'd lost $30,000 over 18 months. The people he owed weren't patient. They weren't understanding. They were the kind of people who broke fingers and burned houses. Burke had offered him a way out. Easy work. Burke said, just some odd jobs. Finding dogs from shelters, from Craigslist, from people who were giving them away for free, bringing them to Burke, getting paid $500 per dog, sometimes more if the dog looked like it could fight. And sometimes, Kyle said in a voice that kept getting smaller, Burke needed dogs to disappear. The ones that wouldn't fight. The ones that were too old, too trained to do anything but police work, too recognizable. "The German Shepherd," Jack said. And his voice could have cut steel. "5 days ago, you did that." Kyle's silence was answer enough. Jack crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed Kyle by his shirt, hauling him up. "That dog was Liberty, David Hayes's dog, my son's partner. You know who David was." "Jack, I'm sorry." Kyle was crying, now 22 years old and crying like a child. Jack's fist went through the drywall next to Kyle's head. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Plaster dust rained down. "You left her to die with 3 puppies." Danny pulled Jack back, though it took effort. "Jack, don't!" Jack stepped away, breathing hard. Danny turned to his son, and the disappointment in his face was worse than any violence. "How could you?" Danny whispered. "You're my son. How could you do this?" Kyle slid off the bed onto his knees. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was Liberty. Burke just gave me the dog and told me to dump it somewhere remote. I was scared, but I'm in too deep. Dad, if I don't pay them back, they'll kill me." Sarah spoke for the first time. "Who will kill you?" "Burke. His people. I still owe 30,000. They said I can work it off or I can disappear. And they don't mean disappear to another state." They moved downstairs to the kitchen. Coffee was made, though no one really drank it. At 3 a.m, exhausted and angry and terrified, they tried to figure out what came next. "We call the police," Tom said. "Burke is the police," Kyle shot back. "Then the FBI," Jack said. "And what happens to Kyle?" Danny asked. "He's an accomplice. He'll go to prison." Sarah, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "He was coerced, threatened. A good lawyer could argue, 'I'm not a victim.'" Kyle interrupted. "I made choices, bad choices. I deserve whatever happens." Danny's eyes were red. I failed you. I should have seen this. Should have known you were in trouble. Dad, this isn't your fault. I was too busy trying to save the farm. I didn't see my own son drowning. Jack had been thinking. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts until he found the one he wanted. I have a contact, FBI, Maria Santos. We served together in the Gulf. She owes me a favor. What are you thinking? Tom asked. Kyle wears a wire, gets Burke to confess on tape. We get enough evidence to bring down the whole operation. Kyle testifies. He gets immunity. That's insane, Danny said. If Burke finds out Kyle's wearing a wire, then Kyle runs, Jack said flatly. But it's the only way to take Burke down and keep Kyle out of prison. They argued for another hour, but in the end, there was no other option that didn't end with Kyle in a cell or Burke walking free or both. At 4 a.m, Jack made the call. Agent Maria Santos answered on the third ring, her voice alert despite the hour. Jack explained the situation in clipped military sentences. Santos was quiet for a long moment. I've been trying to build a case against Burke for 2 years, she finally said. Never had enough evidence. If your boy can get him talking, we move in immediately. The plan was set. Day 11, Kyle would meet Burke, wearing a wire, and get him to confess to running the dogfighting ring, to ordering Liberty's disposal, to everything. The FBI would be listening. At the first sign of the trouble, they'd move in. Kyle looked at his father. What if I can't do it? Jack's answer was cold comfort. Then you run, and you don't stop running. Day 11 dawned cold and clear. At 8 a.m, Kyle Roberts stood in the back of an unmarked FBI van parked half a mile from the abandoned warehouse, trying not to shake while Agent Maria Santos attached a wire to his chest. The device was smaller than Kyle had expected. No bigger than a USB drive. Taped just below his collarbone, a second piece went into the lining of his belt, a GPS tracker. Santos handed him a small button that looked like a shirt snap. This is your panic button, she said, her voice calm and professional. You say the word Dallas, or you press this. We come running. 30 seconds, maximum. Can you do this? Kyle nodded because he didn't trust his voice. Jack, Danny, Tom, and Sarah sat in the van's surveillance area, headphones on, able to hear everything Kyle would hear. Danny gripped his son's hand so hard it hurt. I love you, Danny said. I love you too, Dad. Kyle's voice cracked. Always have. At 9, exactly. Kyle walked into the warehouse alone. The wire transmitted every sound: his footsteps on concrete, his breathing, the distant bark of dogs in their cages. And then Burke's voice, rough and impatient. Kyle, you're late. Sorry, traffic. Kyle's voice sounded steadier than he felt. You got my money. Not yet. That's why I'm here. I need more time. There was a pause. In the van, they could hear Burke moving closer. Kid, we had a deal. You work off the debt or you pay cash. You've done neither. I'm trying. But after that dog, I can't do it anymore. What dog? Burke's voice sharpened. The German Shepherd. You told me to dump it. I did. But people found it. It's all over the news, national news, 50 million views. Another pause, longer this time. Then Burke laughed, and the sound made Sarah's skin crawl. FBI doesn't care about dogs. Kid, relax. But it was a K-9 Boston police. What if they trace it back to... You know what happens to people who talk too much. Burke's voice went cold. I'm not talking, I'm just worried. Good, stay worried. Keeps you in line. In the van? Santos made a cutting gesture. Not enough. They needed more. Kyle seemed to understand because his next words came carefully, like he was picking his way through a minefield. Can I ask something? Why that dog specifically? Why did you want it gone? You ask too many questions. I just need to know I won't get caught. That's all. Why was that dog important? Burke sighed. The sound of a man tired of explaining simple things. Fine. That dog belonged to a cop. Dead cop named Hayes? He was snooping around my operation a few years back, asking questions, getting too close. His dog saw too much. Canines remember faces they're trained to. Couldn't risk it identifying me later. So when the kid who inherited it put feelers out about rehoming, I bought the dog. $500. Best investment I ever made. Jack's face went white. In the van, he mouthed a single word. Marcus. Kyle's voice came through the wire. Careful. Pushing. You had Officer Hayes killed. What? No. He got shot in a drug bust. Dumb luck for him. Good luck for me. After that, getting rid of his dog was just tying up loose ends. So you just wanted Liberty gone. Liberty. Yeah, that was the name, and you were supposed to make sure of that. But you screwed up. Tied her where hikers could find her. Now she's alive, and people are asking questions, which means, kid, you're a liability. The sound of metal on leather, a gun being drawn. But in the van, everyone was on their feet. Burke's voice again, almost apologetic. Nothing personal, just business. Wait, Katie's voice went high with panic. Dallas. 2 gunshots, impossibly loud through the headphones, then screaming Kyle's voice and the sound of his body hitting the ground. Go! Santos was already running, the van doors flying open, agents pouring out. Danny tried to follow, but Jack grabbed him, held him back with strength born of desperation. They could hear it all through the wire, Burke shouting, the tactical team breaching the door. FBI hands up. The scuffle as Burke was taken down, and underneath it all, Kyle's labored breathing and Danny's prayer, please, God, please let him be alive. The scene was controlled in 45 seconds. Burke was on the ground, hands cuffed, shouting about lawyers and rights. Kyle was on his back, blood spreading across his shoulder and down his left thigh, his face white with shock. Danny broke free of Jack's grip and ran. He fell to his knees beside his son, his hands hovering over the wounds, afraid to touch, afraid to hurt him more. Kyle, I'm here. You're okay. You're gonna be okay. Sarah was right behind him, her nurse training kicking in immediately. She pressed her jacket against the shoulder wound, checking the thigh. 2 gunshot wounds, shoulder and femoral region. Missed the femoral artery. Thank God. He'll live. But we need an ambulance now. The EMTs arrived within 4 minutes. They loaded Kyle onto a stretcher, started IV lines, applied pressure bandages. Danny climbed into the ambulance without asking permission. As the doors closed, Kyle reached for his father's hand. Liberty, he mumbled, high on shock and pain. Is she okay? Yes, son, Danny said through tears. She's okay. Because of you. The surgery took 4 hours. 2 bullets extracted, one from the shoulder joint where it had shattered the clavicle, one from the thigh where it had nicked the sciatic nerve. Kyle would need 6 months of physical therapy. He'd probably always have a limp. But he was alive. Burke wasn't as lucky. 15 charges: animal cruelty, illegal gambling, racketeering, money laundering, attempted murder. Bail was set at $5 million. He couldn't make it. He'd wait for trial in a cell. Kyle's legal situation was complicated. Agent Santos pushed hard for full immunity. He'd been a cooperating witness who'd nearly died getting evidence. But the district attorney wanted something on record. After 3 days of negotiation and a lawyer Danny couldn't really afford but hired anyway, they reached a plea deal. Kyle would plead guilty to 1 count of accessory to animal cruelty, receive 2,000 hours of community service at Mountain View Animal Rescue, and no jail time. If he stayed clean for 2 years and completed his service, the conviction would be expunged on day 12. Kyle woke up in the hospital to find his mother sitting beside his bed. Linda Roberts hadn't spoken to Danny in 8 months, not since she'd filed for divorce. But when she got the call that Kyle had been shot, she'd driven 3 hours without stopping. "Mom?" Kyle's voice was rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. Linda took his hand and cried. Danny stood on the other side of the bed, and slowly, carefully, Linda reached for his hand too. For the first time in nearly a year, Kyle's parents touched each other without anger. Over the next 3 days, they took turns at Kyle's bedside. They talked, really talked, about money troubles and pride and all the ways they'd failed to communicate, about how saving the farm had consumed Danny so completely he'd stopped seeing his family, about how Linda had felt so alone she'd convinced herself leaving was the only option. On day 16, Sarah brought Liberty to the hospital. Technically, pets weren't allowed, but Sarah had called in favors. She'd gotten Ellen to write a letter designating Liberty as a therapy dog. The hospital administrator, who'd seen the viral video like everyone else in America, personally approved the visit. Liberty walked into Kyle's room slowly, still favoring her left front leg. When she saw Kyle in the bed, tubes running from his arms, bandages visible beneath his hospital gown, she stopped. Her ears went back. For a moment, Sarah thought Liberty might refuse to approach. Then Kyle spoke, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, girl. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." Liberty's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. She walked to the bed, put her paws up on the mattress, and licked Kyle's face. Once, twice, her whole body wiggling with the force of her wagging. Kyle wrapped his good arm around her neck and sobbed into her fur. "You forgive me. You really forgive me." Liberty licked his tears and whined softly, pressing closer. Sarah stood in the doorway watching and thought about the nature of forgiveness, about how animals didn't hold grudges the way humans did. They lived in the present moment, responding to who you were now, not who you'd been. "She knows," Sarah said quietly. "She knows you saved her in the end." Danny stood beside the bed, one hand on his son's shoulder, one hand resting on Liberty's head, and finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. Day 18. Dr. Ellen Crawford called Jack at 7 in the morning, her voice tight with something he couldn't identify. Not quite worry, not quite excitement, something else entirely. "We need to talk," she said, "about Liberty, about those puppies. Can you come to the clinic?" An hour later, Jack, Tom, Sarah, and Danny, who'd left Kyle's bedside for the first time in a week, sat in Ellen's office while she pulled up lab results on her computer screen. "I ran DNA tests," Ellen said without preamble, "on Liberty and all 3 puppies. Standard maternity verification." She turned the screen toward them. "Liberty is not their biological mother." The words hung in the air like smoke. "What?" Sarah leaned forward. "But she was with them. She was nursing them. She was trying to nurse them," Ellen corrected. "But she has no milk. Her mammary glands are underdeveloped, consistent with a female who's never given birth, and these DNA results confirm it. Those 3 puppies don't share Liberty's genetics. In fact, they don't even share the same father. 2 different sires. One dam, but that dam isn't Liberty." Tom's brow furrowed. "Then whose puppies are they?" "Based on the breed markers in their DNA. They're from fighting dogs. Pit Bull mix, German Shepherd mix, Rottweiler mix, the kinds of dogs Burke's operation would breed and then discard if they showed any weakness." "So Liberty just found them?" Danny asked. Ellen nodded slowly. "It's called alloparenting, adoption behavior. It occurs in many species: penguins, lions, elephants, and yes, dogs. Particularly in females with strong maternal instincts who haven't had offspring of their own. Liberty is 8 years old. She was spayed after retiring from candy duty, so she never had puppies. But the instinct was still there." Jack was very quiet. His military mind was reordering the timeline, reconstructing the crime scene with this new information. "So when Kyle tied Liberty to that tree, the puppies weren't with her?" "No," Ellen said. "Based on the evidence you collected and what Kyle told you, Liberty was alone when she was abandoned. The puppies were dumped in the same area, probably by Burke's people. Maybe a day or 2 later, Liberty must have heard them crying." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "She could have left. She'd chewed through most of that rope. We saw the teeth marks. She could have saved herself. But she didn't." Ellen's voice cracked. "She stayed, found those puppies, brought them to her, kept them warm with her own body even though she was starving. For 2 days, Liberty saved 3 puppies that weren't hers from a situation she could have escaped, while her own life slipped away." The room was silent except for the hum of the computer. Jack stood abruptly. "I need to go to Boston. There's someone I need to see." Marcus Hayes lived in a recovery house in Dorchester, a 3-story building that had once been a rectory. It housed 12 men in various stages of rebuilding their lives after addiction. Marcus had been clean for 14 months. He worked at a coffee shop during the day and attended NA meetings 3 nights a week. When Jack knocked on his door, Marcus opened it, already crying. He'd seen the viral video. He'd seen Liberty on the news. He'd known this conversation was coming. "Grandpa Jack," Marcus said, and his voice was the voice of the 7-year-old boy Jack had first met in the foster system. Small and scared and certain he deserved every bad thing that happened to him. "Tell me everything," Jack said, not unkindly, and sat on the single chair in Marcus's sparse room. The story came out like a confession, like poison being drawn from a wound. After David died, Marcus had fallen apart. Depression first, so deep he couldn't get out of bed. Then his friends, though the Jack used a different word for them in his mind, had introduced him to cocaine. just to feel something, just to make the pain stop for a few hours. It didn't stop the pain. It just added new pain on top of the old within 6 months. Marcus owed $15,000 to a dealer named Ricky, who operated out of a bar in Southie. By 8 months, the debt had doubled with interest. By 10 months, Ricky's associates were showing up at Marcus's apartment with brass knuckles and suggestions about kneecaps. Marcus had sold everything: his father's medals, his father's service weapon, his own laptop, his phone, his grandmother's jewelry, everything except liberty, because even in the depths of addiction, he couldn't sell his father's dog. Until August 22, when Ricky told him he had 1 week to come up with the money or accidents happen. "There was a guy on Craigslist," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Said he was looking for a German Shepherd for his farm upstate. Protection dog. He said he'd pay $500 cash, no questions. I thought it was better than a shelter." "Better than nothing." "It wasn't a farmer," Jack said. "No." Marcus's hands shook. "I found out later. After Mom told me Liberty was missing, I saw the guy's picture in the paper. He'd been arrested for something else. Police Chief Raymond Burke. I sold my dad's dog to the man who—" He couldn't finish. "To the man who'd been surveilling your father before he died," Jack said quietly. "Burke needed Liberty gone because she might have been able to identify him." Marcus looked up, his eyes red. "My dad was shot by criminals during a drug raid." "Maybe," Jack said. "Or maybe Burke arranged it. We'll probably never know. But either way, you didn't kill Liberty. Marcus, you made a mistake, a big one. But she's alive." Marcus's face crumbled. "I don't deserve to see her." "Maybe not," Jack agreed. "But she deserves to see you, if you're ready, if you're strong enough." 2 days later, Jack drove back to North Carolina with Ellen and Marcus in his truck. The ride was mostly silent. Marcus stared out the window, hands twisting in his lap, practicing the apology he'd been writing in his head for 3 years. They arrived at Mountain View Animal Rescue at noon. Ellen led them to the outdoor recovery pen where Liberty spent her afternoons, finally strong enough to enjoy the winter sunshine. She was lying in a patch of light, and around her, the 3 puppies, now 12 weeks old, healthy and fat, tumbled over each other in play. Liberty saw Marcus before he saw her. Her head came up, her ears pricked forward, and then she was running, still limping slightly on that front leg, but running with the joy of a dog who'd found something precious she thought was lost forever. Marcus dropped to his knees, and Liberty hit him like a wave, knocking him backward into the grass. She was licking his face, whining, her whole body wiggling, and Marcus was holding her and sobbing and saying, "I'm sorry," over and over like a prayer. The 3 puppies, curious about the commotion, bounded over. They climbed on Marcus, licking his ears, tugging his jacket. Hope, the smallest, the one who'd nearly died, sat on his chest and barked once, proud and loud. "Who are these?" Marcus managed to ask through tears. Ellen sat down beside them in the grass. Her kids? Well, adopted kids. She saved them, chose to stay with them even when it meant she might die. Marcus looked at Liberty, really looked at her. "You became a mom." Liberty licked his face again, then turned and herded the puppies closer with her nose, as if presenting them. Faith, Grace, and Hope tumbled into Marcus's lap. and Liberty sat beside him, pressed against his side, her tail wagging so hard it thumped the ground. "She's not angry," Marcus whispered in wonder. "Dogs don't hold on to the past the way we do," Sarah said. She'd been watching from the fence, giving them space. They forgive. They move forward. They just love who's in front of them right now. Jack stood with Ellen, watching the reunion. The afternoon sun turned Liberty's coat to gold. Marcus had his arms around her neck, and she was leaning into him with her full weight, the way dogs do when they trust completely. "David would be proud of her," Ellen said softly. "He would," Jack agreed. "She did what he taught her. Protect the innocent. Never leave anyone behind, even when it costs everything." That evening, they all gathered at the clinic. Jack, Ellen, Marcus, Sarah, Danny, Linda, and Kyle in his wheelchair. They sat in the recovery room while Liberty and her puppies played. It felt, Jack thought, like a family reunion, a strange family, cobbled together by tragedy and chance and one dog's impossible choice. Kyle couldn't stop watching Liberty. "I still don't understand," he said finally. "Why would she save puppies that weren't hers? She could have lived. Why would she choose to stay?" Ellen smiled, scratching Liberty behind the ears. "Because that's what love is. It's not about biology. It's not about what you get back. It's about seeing something helpless and choosing not to walk away. Liberty spent her whole life serving, protecting. That's who she is. Even alone, even dying, she couldn't stop being a hero." As Sarah thought about Emily, about the cars that had passed her daughter on that roadside, she thought about the choice Liberty had made, the opposite choice, to stop, to stay, to pay the cost of love. Tom thought about the 5 years stolen from him and how Liberty had been there the night he was arrested and how he'd held a grudge against all Canes for a decade. He thought about forgiveness, about how holding on to hate had only hurt himself. Danny and Linda sat with their hands intertwined, watching their son watch the dog he'd tried to kill. And somehow, impossibly, there was hope in the room, hope that mistakes could be forgiven, hope that families could be rebuilt, hope that love was bigger than the worst thing you'd ever done. Jack was the last to leave that night. He stood alone with Liberty under the stars, and he talked to her the way he used to talk to David when David was ill and having nightmares. "Your dad would be so proud," he told her. "You kept his promise. You protected, you served, you loved, without asking for anything back. That's what Hayes men do. That's what Hayes dogs do. You're a good girl, Liberty, the very best girl." Liberty wagged her tail and pressed her head against his leg, and Jack let himself believe that somewhere David was watching and smiling and finally at peace. Day 30. The courtroom was packed with people who'd followed Liberty's story from the beginning. Reporters lined the back wall. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd owned German Shepherds her whole life, listened carefully as Kyle Roberts stood to enter his plea. "Guilty, Your Honor," Kyle said, his voice steady, "to 1 count of accessory to animal cruelty." The judge reviewed the plea agreement, 2,000 hours of community service at Mountain View Animal Rescue, no jail time. Conviction expunged after 2 years of clean conduct. When it was time for Kyle to speak, he turned to face the courtroom. "Your Honor, I don't deserve mercy. What I did was unforgivable. I left an innocent animal to die because I was a coward. But she didn't die. And maybe that's grace giving me a second chance. I'll spend every day earning that chance. Thank you. Danny stood next. My son made mistakes, but he's owning them. That's more than most people do. I'm proud of him. The gavel came down. Kyle was free to go. Burke got it 25 years. 13 others involved in the fighting ring received sentences ranging from probation to 10 years. Outside the courthouse, Kyle walked without crutches for the first time since the shooting. His limp would be permanent, but he was walking. Danny and Linda stood on either side of him, together. And when the reporters asked for a statement, Danny simply said, "We're going home." They went home to the farm, where Liberty and Grace were waiting. Over the previous 2 weeks, they'd made the decision as a family Liberty would live with them, along with Grace, the puppy with black and white fur who'd bonded most strongly with Kyle during his recovery visits. Sarah adopted Faith, the brown and tall puppy who'd proven gentle and intuitive with people in pain. Faith was already training to be a therapy dog. Sarah had returned to nursing, and twice a week, she brought Faith to the hospital where children fighting cancer would bury their faces in her soft fur and forget for a few minutes that they were sick. Marcus and Ellen took Hope, the smallest, the one who'd nearly died. Hope was 15 weeks old now, healthy and strong, and showing all the intelligence and drive of her adopted mother. Marcus had enrolled in a K-1 training program. Hope would be his first trainee. If all went well, in 18 months, Hope would follow in Liberty's footsteps. As an explosives detection king, Jack didn't adopt any of them. Instead, he did something bigger. He used the remaining GoFundMe money, combined with his life savings and a loan against his motorcycle shop, to establish the Hayes and Liberty K-9 Memorial Foundation. Its mission was twofold: train new K-9 unit and rescue dogs from abuse and fighting operations. Tom Bradley became the foundation's executive director. It was the first real job he'd had since prison. The first time in 10 years he'd felt like his life had purpose beyond survival. The months that followed were quiet and healing. Kyle worked at Mountain View Animal Rescue 40 hours a week, cleaning kennels and feeding animals and learning, slowly, what it meant to care for something other than himself. Danny and Linda officially withdrew their divorce papers in April. In May, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony in their backyard, with Liberty as the honorary ring bearer. Sarah began sleeping through the night for the first time since Emily died. Faith would curl up at the foot of her bed, and somehow the weight of the dog made the nightmares stay away. Marcus stayed clean. 14 months became 18, became 24. He got his K-9 training certification. Hope graduated top of her class. And Liberty finally got to rest. She spent her days at the farm, lying in the sun, watching Grace grow. Kyle would sit with her for hours, telling her about his day, about the dogs he'd helped, about the second chance she'd given him. Then, 6 months after the trial, Danny Roberts collapsed in the barn, massive heart attack. The EMTs did everything they could, but the damage was too severe. Too much stress over too many years. His heart finally said enough. He was 53 years old. The funeral was held on a Saturday in July. 200 people came, bikers from 3 states, wearing their leather and their grief. Danny had touched more lives than he'd known. The pastor spoke about redemption and sacrifice and love. Kyle read a eulogy, his voice breaking. My dad saved me twice. Once when he didn't give up on me. Once when he showed me what love really means. He forgave me when I didn't deserve it. He loved Liberty when she had no one. He taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who you choose to save. Liberty lay beside Danny's casket during the service. She didn't understand death, but she understood loss. She understood that someone she loved was gone when they lowered the casket into the earth. Liberty's howl rang across the cemetery, primal and heartbroken. Danny's will left the farm to Linda and Kyle. His life insurance, $100,000, went to Mountain View Animal Rescue. Ellen wept when she heard Liberty stayed with Linda and Kyle at the farm. But something had changed in her. She stopped eating for 3 days. She would lie at the end of the driveway, watching, waiting for Danny to come home. On the 4th day, Kyle carried her inside and held her while she cried yes. Cried, tears streaming from those amber eyes, and finally, she ate a little chicken. The seasons turned. Summer became fall, became winter again. 1 year after the rescue, almost to the day, Jack organized a memorial service in Boston for David Hayes. It was the 4th anniversary of David's death. They unveiled a small monument in the park where David used to train Liberty, a bronze plaque with both their names, Officer David Hayes and K.T. Liberty, heroes in service, forever in our hearts. Liberty, now 11 years old and gray around the muzzle, attended the ceremony. She walked slowly, her arthritis making every step difficult. Her eyes were dimming with cataracts. But when Marcus led her up to the monument and she sniffed David's name etched in bronze, her tail wagged. That night, back at Jack's house in Asheville, Liberty climbed onto the bed that had once been David's, the one Jack had kept all these years. Faith, Grace, and Hope, now full-grown dogs, visiting for the memorial, curled up around their adopted mother. Jack sat beside the bed, his hand on Liberty's head. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "David's proud. I'm proud. You can rest now." Liberty's tail wagged once, twice. Her eyes closed. In the morning, she didn't wake up. The vet said she died in her sleep, peacefully, her heart simply deciding it had done enough. She was 11 years old. She'd lived 6 years with David. 3 years lost and struggling, and 2 years being loved by a patchwork family of broken people she'd helped put back together. They buried her beside the monument to David Hayes. The headstone read, "Liberty, K9 hero. Mother, she saved lives. Then she saved love. 2010 to 2026. At the funeral, Marcus spoke. "My dad used to say that Liberty wasn't just a dog. She was the best of what we could be, loyal, brave, loving, without condition. She proved him right, even when we failed her. Hey, she never failed us." Sarah laid flowers. Tom stood at attention. The military salute he'd never given in life offered now to a dog who'd shown him what honor really meant. Kyle planted a dogwood tree beside her grave. Linda held his hand. Jack stood alone, watching, and let himself cry. Hope, Faith, and Grace sat in a line, all three wearing K-tie training vests now. 3 dogs who shouldn't have survived. 3 dogs Liberty had chosen to save. Her legacy, walking and breathing and ready to serve. They say dogs don't live long enough, and they're right. 11 years wasn't enough for Liberty. 53 years wasn't enough for Danny. But maybe it's not about how long we live. It's about what we do with the time we have. Liberty could have run. She could have saved herself, but she stayed because 3 puppies needed her. That choice changed everything. It saved Kyle. It healed Sarah. It gave Tom purpose. It brought Marcus back from the edge. 1 dog, 1 choice, ripples that touched hundreds of lives. So tonight, when you go home, hug your dog a little tighter, forgive a little faster, love a little braver, because you never know which moment will be the one that saves someone. And if you see a stray dog on the side of the road, stop. Please stop. Because that dog might be someone's liberty, and that someone might be you. Have you ever had an animal change your life? Have you ever been given a second chance you didn't think you deserved? Share your story in the comments below. Let's honor liberty by remembering that love, real love, doesn't count the cost. It just shows up every single time.